August 19th, 1919, the day Afghanistan gained its independence. Kind of. Afghanistan's independence can actually be traced back to 1747, when Ahmad Shah Durrani formed the Durrani Empire, or even to 1709, when Mirwais Hotak pushed the Safavid Persians out of the country. So what's so special about 1919? Well, it's when the Afghans, under the rule of this man, Amir Amanullah, regained full sovereignty by taking back control over their foreign affairs. In order to do this though, Amir Amanullah had to go to war with the mighty British Empire, in a conflict now known as the Third Anglo-Afghan War. Throughout the 19th century, Britain and Russia engaged in what historians refer to as the Great Game, whereby the two sides vied for domination over Persia and Afghanistan. For Britain, India was the jewel in the crown, so a potentially hostile neighbouring Afghanistan was unacceptable. Twice during the 19th century, Britain invaded the rugged country, both times getting their fingers burnt. The retreat from Kabul in 1842 at the end of the First Anglo-Afghan War was arguably the worst British military disaster of the 19th century. During the Second Anglo-Afghan War, the British enforced the Treaty of Gandamak upon the Afghans in 1879. This treaty stipulated that whilst the Afghan Emir could maintain his own internal rule, control of the country's foreign affairs would be the prerogative of British India. In return, the Afghan Emir would receive British protection as well as an annual subsidy, thereby essentially being reduced to a dependency. In this time, the British were eager to officially demarcate Afghanistan's borders. In 1893, Amir Abdurrahman Khan, the man known as the Iron Emir, signed a contentious agreement with the British that produced the border between Afghanistan and British India, aka the Durand Line. As a result of this line, the Pashtuns, the dominant ethnic group in Afghanistan, were split across two political entities. Like so many other colonial partitions, the arbitrariness of this line ensured that the spillover of tension still continues to this day between Afghanistan and the successor of British India, Pakistan. In 1901, Amir Habibullah came to power. Much softer than his father, he allowed the return of prominent exiled families. This is significant because returning families brought with them new ideas that the Afghanistan closed off by Amir Abdurrahman Khan did not yet have access to. Chief amongst this group was Mahmoud Tarzi, who spent almost 2 decades in the Ottoman Empire. Through the editorship of his newspaper, Sirajul Akhbar, Tarzi propagated ideas that were wildly popular amongst the intellectuals of the colonized world. Everything from anti-imperialism to nationalism to Islamic modernism. Tarzi even developed a mentor-protege relationship with Prince Amanullah, who would go on to become his son-in-law. Issues of sovereignty and anti-imperialism were so popular in Afghanistan at this time that they were the uniting force bringing together the progressives and the conservative factions at the Afghan royal court. It wasn't hard to be annoyed if you were an Afghan nationalist in this time, considering the existence of things like the Anglo-Russian Convention of 1907. This was the agreement between Britain and Russia which officially brought an end to the Great Game by clearly demarcating zones of influence in Central Asia and Persia. All of this was done, however, without the consent of the countries they were acting on behalf of. Even Amir Habibullah was enraged that the agreement had been made without his nation's say-so. World War I proved to be a big test. Even though the German allied Ottoman Sultan called for Muslims to start a jihad against the Allies, Amir Habibullah held out, despite the outcry of the staunchly Muslim and anti-imperialist Afghan society. The Emir wanted independence, but was much more politically conservative than many of those at his court. He would pay for his conservatism with his life because shortly after World War I, he was assassinated. After a few days of rule from Nasrullah, Habibullah's brother, the enigmatic Amanullah would depose his uncle and accuse him of complicity in his father's murder. Although Habibullah's killers have never been revealed, Amanullah is as likely a suspect as anybody. But who killed Habibullah is not as important as why he was killed, because the why would reveal the course taken by his successor. You see, almost the entire royal court was united in their desire for complete independence from British India, and Habibullah was seen as an obstacle to that. His son Amanullah, under the guidance of the modernist-minded reformer Mahmoud Tarzi, immediately set about to regain complete sovereignty over Afghan affairs. Pragmatically, Amanullah needed a way to unite the nation against a common foe. Considering elements of the conservative status quo were unhappy about their new king for his modernist disposition and for the way he threw his uncle, the foremost conservative leader in the country, in prison. Nonetheless, it should not be undermined that there was widespread, one could almost say a national desire for independence. The historian Vartan Gregorian writes, in 1919, no ruler could have succeeded in establishing a stronghold over the Afghan nation without pledging himself to the cause of total Afghan independence. And so in his very first royal proclamation, Amanullah vowed to lead his nation to total independence, a promise which was received very positively by the Afghan populace. By this time, the Third Anglo-Afghan War was inevitable. Amanullah sent a letter to the Viceroy of India that proclaimed the independence of his country. The response showed that the British did not take the new Emir seriously, being slow to reply and vague in their response. And so, in early May 1919, Amanullah gave the order to invade British India. In the past, Afghan invasions of India had resulted in vast conquests and plunder. Their invasion this time came at a few different points along the frontier. Amanullah had hoped for a wide-scale Pashtun rebellion from his fellow Pashtun brethren across the Durand Line in British India against their European colonizers. Some tribal support was forthcoming from the Waziris and Mahsuds, especially after the success of Nader Khan, commander-in-chief of the Afghan forces and future king, who was able to capture the fortress of Tal across the frontier in British India. But the British, always on their toes for a tribal Pashtun uprising, had adequately prepared for this in the months leading up to the war, and prevented large Pashtun tribes such as the Afridis and Mohmands from mobilizing. After initial Afghan success, the British were able to neutralize the Afghan threat. The British had more men, with better training and better weaponry. To the horror of the Afghans, they even bombed major Afghan cities like Kabul and Jalalabad. However, the British had just finished fighting in World War I and did not have the stomach for renewed conflict. In the face of stiff Afghan resistance and the almost perennial danger of an uprising among the Pashtuns on the frontier, the British found it expedient to be on peaceful terms with the Afghans. So when the Afghans approached with an offer of an armistice in late May, the British gladly accepted. Both sides claimed victory, but considering the overwhelming disparity in the military capabilities of the two sides, it's clear that the Afghans had more to cheer about in light of the fact that they had forced the mighty British to the negotiating table. The end to the war was not as smooth sailing as it is often depicted. Negotiations dragged on for more than 2 years. Nonetheless, the Treaty of Rawalpindi was signed on August 8, 1919 and signalled a formal armistice. The Afghans, under their energetic foreign minister Mahmoud Tarzi, almost immediately began a vigorous campaign of establishing bilateral relations with various states, thus raising their political legitimacy in the international community. The British would only come to recognize Afghanistan's independence 2 years later. The Anglo-Afghan Treaty was signed in 1921 with the complete recognition from the British that Afghanistan was now a sovereign and independent nation. But the Afghans had to pay a price. The Durand Line was upheld as the official border delineating the two states. Nevertheless, even the final agreement itself was considered to be a temporary arrangement. The issue of the Durand Line was in no way, shape or form put to rest. Indeed, it still plagues Afghan-Pakistani relations today. But the Anglo-Afghan War of 1919 had resulted in Afghanistan becoming one of, if not the only Muslim country at the time that was independent. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. As some of you may have noticed, this video is a remake of an old one. I chose this particular video because Afghan history naturally intrigues me more than other histories, considering I am Afghan, and plus the timing, because Afghan Independence Day is coming up. With that being said, Khbalwaki Uraz Mubarak Sha wa Rozi Istiqlal Mubarak to all of my Afghan subscribers out there. If there's any other old video that I've done which you think you would like to see a remake of, because obviously my production value has improved, at least a little bit I like to think, let me know in the comment section below. And don't forget to check out my new channel Street Food Bites if you want to see delicious street food being prepared. And obviously I have to thank my patrons for always supporting. Until next time, peace!